So clearly there's a fear among many gun owners across America who think gun control is just a slippery slope to the complete erosion of the Second Amendment. And a consistent argument we hear is that any new gun laws will affect responsible gun owners, since they are the law-abiding citizens, whereas people who use guns violently are criminals who will ignore the laws regardless. I want to turn to you, Ben. I want to make sure everyone's getting enough time here. A poll done by Johns Hopkins University this year found that 74% of NRA members support background checks for all gun sales. Do you think a responsible gun owner should support background checks?
Well, look, I think that there is a lot of people out there, a lot of them, who would say exactly what you just said, that they're okay with background checks, and they're okay with even, closing some of what are called the gun show loopholes, and they're okay with those issues. What they fear, though, is the fact that, again, the point about criminals not following the law, I mean, that's a fact. We all know that's the case. But look, I think there's a bigger issue here, too, that hasn't been discussed, and that is the issue of even government doesn't follow the law. I mean, there's a huge story that we have of this Fast and Furious scandal where the U.S. government, through the ATF, was forcing gun shops on the border to break federal law and to sell guns to known straw buyers and multiple guns and smuggle them into other countries. I mean, we have major issues here of saying it's not just criminals who don't follow the law, but many times government doesn't even follow its own laws, and yet the people who are expected to follow the law, again, the law-abiding gun owner. And so there are major issues here when it comes to restrictions being placed on access to guns. If you want to require people to get background checks, I think most people are okay with that. They don't have a major issue. But when you start trying to limit it on a number of different fronts simultaneously, that's when most people, I think, get pretty nervous about it.
Leah, I could see you're itching to respond. Go for it.
Well, I mean, where do I jump in? There's so many things to respond to. First of all, why did the gun lobby oppose background checks if they don't have a problem with them? I tell you one reason is they would cut down on their gun sales. They know that their bad apple gun dealers are selling illegally to straw purchasers and to gun traffickers, and they're doing nothing about it. We know this from testimony that gun manufacturers made in front of Congress in 2002. So, basic common sense measures are not the slippery slope that the NRA and the gun lobby love to fearmonger about. It's ridiculous. You're never going to get rid of guns in this country. What you can do is you can reduce gun violence, gun death, and injury. And it seems to me that's something everyone can get behind. And there was one point I wanted to make about high-capacity magazines that wasn't made in that discussion. Adam Lanza had 4 30-round high-capacity magazines with him when he went into that elementary school. If he had only 10-round magazines, he would not have been able to get off 140 rounds and kill as many children as he did in under 4 minutes. So it does matter. High-capacity magazines are for assault weapons. They're weapons of war, and they should not be in the hands of civilians. You know, General Stanley McChrystal has said as much. The Association of Chiefs of Police, law enforcement, they don't see no reason for civilians to have these high-capacity magazines, which are intended to inflict maximum carnage, to spray shoot, and that's why they're used by mass shooters, and they kill so many people so efficiently and effectively.
Richard, let's move on to you. Clearly something needs to be done. If gun control isn't the answer, then how should we be directing our funds? I mean, should we be directing them toward mental health services to solve this violent epidemic? Again,
there are 3 subsets within this issue. The American people, in some recent polling data, Rasmussen, no longer trust their own government. If you want to understand really what's behind the whole power of the issue of guns, it's really a symbolic issue. It's about the relationship between the governed and their government. And when the government basically trusts the people who've never misused their guns, the people say, well, this is a government worthy of my trust. When the government, particularly military leaders, law enforcement leaders, whose salaries are paid by our taxes, no longer trust the citizens wonder, why should we trust that government? Okay. Therein lies the power of the gun issue in American politics. Well, let's see if Jill can answer this. Okay, what about wealth inequality? You mentioned this earlier, which is at its highest since the Great Depression. How does this factor into gun violence, Jill?
Well, if you look at rates of gun violence world over, they're very highly correlated with rates of poverty. And to the point that Richard was making, you know, people don't trust government because government has been bought and paid for by powerful special interests like the NRA. And to Richard's previous point, you know, that the NRA represents, you know, ordinary responsible gun owners, the NRA is actually doing a disservice and fails to represent the interests of ordinary gun owners because it's become dominated by big industry, and its policies essentially reflect a marketing strategy to keep selling guns. So the Australia experience in 1995, when they passed limits on automatic weapons and background checks, and they actually did a buyback of dangerous automatic and semi-automatic weapons, they have not had a single mass shooting ever since, and they used to have them regularly, and their rates of ordinary gun violence have dropped by half. They have saved $500 billion per year. So there is a way to do this, and it works, and we have a terrific experience to look at. It has not been a slippery slope in Australia. Australia is every bit as much gun culture as America, and it has not been a slippery slope, and people use guns responsibly. We can do that here, too.
I'm going to jump in right here, and let's bring this back to the Second Amendment, because many people think that it all comes down to guns preventing government tyranny. Let's listen to what Alex Jones had to say about this on Piers Morgan.
The tyrants did it. Hitler took the guns. Stalin took the guns. Mao took the guns. Fidel Castro took the guns. Hugo Chavez took the guns. And I'm here to tell you, 1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
And do you agree with the general premise here?
Did you ask me? I'm sorry.
No. Yes, Ben, just the general premise of
I think that in terms of the general premise, I think that there are millions of Americans who feel that way. Listen, whether you like Alex Jones or not, if you think that he's a kook or you think he's right on, there are millions of people who believe, especially as we see the increasing militarization of police in the United States, they feel like there is a huge threat to the populace. And there is a growing fear among people who say, hey, listen, the Second Amendment is about matching force with military and matching force with government. And so if the government may have it, then the individual should have it too, and the citizen should have it. And let me tell you that it isn't just, you know, a fringe group of people who feel this way. There are many millions of people in America who feel that way, and it's a growing number of people. And that is one part that the media really doesn't talk about a whole lot. There are many people who feel like when government comes in and starts trying to restrict some of these massive you know, the magazines, trying to restrict the kinds of weapons. And by the way, just a quick point on the magazines, the shooters at Virginia Tech and Columbine only had those 10-round magazines also. So there are mass shootings where they have those smaller capacity, it doesn't help. But when people see that happening, they're very concerned about it, especially as we watch the build-up and the militarization, where we now have a lot of military equipment being granted to sheriff's departments and police departments around the country, and there are many people who are insecure about that idea.
Leah, your response?
What kind of society do we want to live in? Do we really want everyone to be armed to the teeth? I mean, come on, let's stand back a little bit, guys. I mean, you look at the 19th century in this country, a little history lesson here, okay? Second Amendment, first of all, refers to a militia with muskets. We now have a standing army. We have police force. You know, the citizenry wasn't meant to be armed. There were arms, gun census done in the 18th and 19th century, where you go around and actually ask people if they had guns in their home and were they in working order. The NRA would go absolutely bonkers if that happened today, but that's what was happening. And also in the 19th century, you weren't allowed to bring your gun in the wild, wild west into the city limits because the sheriffs and law enforcement, yes, law enforcement does keep the peace, knew that that was a recipe for disaster, to bring your gun into Miss Kitty's saloon because accidents happen. So we've actually, you know, backtracked. We've regressed as a nation. In the 21st century America, we are heavily armed to the teeth. To what end? What are we so afraid of? That, you know, I would love for people to answer that question. You say you're afraid of the government?
Good question,
I mean, give me
Leah.
a break. You think you're really gonna? You think you're really gonna rebel against the government? I mean, who are you talking about?
You guys, we're taking a quick break here. Good points, everyone. Coming up, we'll take a look at the growing industry of 3D gun printing and post some questions to our panel from social media.